Hello and a warm welcome to Django TV African Perspective. I am Cyril Django and my producer is Titus Kedegu. Today we are asking, what does the Trump presidency mean for Africa in his second term? As we all know, and quite astonishingly, and beyond all expectation, Trump prevailed in the U.S. presidential election under the Republican ticket, defeating his challenger from the Democratic Party, Kamala Harris, by clear margins. I mean, really clear margins. While Kamala was campaigning as president of the world, Trump was campaigning as president of the U.S. That is a major distinction between the Trump campaign and the Kamala Harris campaign. Africa was hoping that Trump would not win. Africa was betting that Kamala will win because Kamala would be exposed to supporting countries like those in Africa through aid and debt. But that has failed. We now have a Trump presidency coming up in January. And Trump's foreign policy is one of isolationism. It is one he created under the slogan, "Make America Great Again." On that philosophy, Trump has argued that globalization is defeating the interest of America, that globalization is taking away jobs and manufacturing from America to other parts of the world, and then selling this finished product back to America at a very high cost. And his first term in office proved to be a period of trade wars where he used tariffs as an economic tool to defeat the imports of products from places like China, Europe, and other parts of the world. And in that time, President Trump never for once conducted the usual US-Africa summits where the President of the United States would normally host African leaders and create deals that would benefit them particularly, and that could transform into aid and debt for Africa. In fact, in his 4-year term, he described us as a shithole. I was mad, I was vexed at that description coming from a racist. But on second thought, I agreed with him. When he called us a shithole, he was merely challenging us to be what we are supposed to be since the 1960s. It was telling us that you guys are simply allowing yourself to be used and abused by others. And it's about time you use your potentials and your economic prowess to solve your own problems. His second term in the office of the presidency of the U.S. would mean one thing for us again, that he would never hit us seriously, that we will continue to be the shithole that we are. He never for once planned to visit Africa. He never for once accepted any policy that is going to bring economic windfall to Africa. He was concentrating on developing the U.S. and true to the Trump policy. When he left office in 2020 and handed power to the current president, Joe Biden, inflation was under 2%. Now, inflation in the U.S. is 6%. There you will see his Make America Great Again policy was correct. He left very high employment rates in the U.S., but now employment rate is flattering. He left very positive economic policies because more and more manufacturing jobs were going back to the US. Cost of manufacturing was low and jobs were created. Africa in the time was unsure how to deal with Trump. But then it was clear by the time he left office that Africa is not a priority for him. That Africa is indeed and truly shithole vis-a-vis our resources and our human capital ability. So, effectively, a Trump presidency would mean again that every nation for itself and God for us all. With Trump, it is a blessing in disguise for Africa to have its own footing, to have its own stamina, because he would not tolerate the dependence of the African countries on the US. He would not meet African presidents in the Africa-US summit. He would treat our leaders disdainfully. And that's quite okay with me, because by so doing, he's making it clear that we have the potential and the resources to be able to lift up our economy, build on our own economic base, and improve on the lives of our people. I would argue that the Trump presidency, being a blessing to Africa, would mean African leaders, through regional bodies, through the African Union, are bound to revisit their policies, to create African economic systems that can work for Africa. As we know, trade between and among African states is far, far expensive than trade with Europe, than trade with Asia, than trade with specific countries like China, like Britain, like France, like Germany, and like the US. We have, to use this 4-year term of President Trump, to make trade cheaper, easier, and faster between and among ourselves in Africa. We have to invest on our own people. We have to use the instruments of the African Union and regional bodies like SADC and ECOWAS to create a free trade zone. Already, there's the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is actually very slow in taking hold. And despite the effort of Rwanda in bringing this to the forefront, there is huge cold feet with actualizing a dream of liberalizing trade and transport across Africa. But I think with us being a shittle to Donald Trump, with us being relegated as the backboners, we can now begin to use those very African tools to develop our own resources, our own ability to grow. The world is moving very fast. The world is at a stage where globalization is almost dead. Trump singularly has destroyed globalization, which effectively meant that big countries, big economies could invest in poor countries at very reasonable cost and extract huge economic potential and then take the profits back to their countries. Now it is left with Africa to own its own manufacturing base, to own its own consumer base, and to develop its economy. Matter of fact, we have the resources to be a major manufacturing base, and we have the consumer base to be the biggest consumer of African produce, African manufacturing, and African services. If we're serious, we would use Trump's challenge to us and Trump's disrespect of us to rise above the level that we are in. Africa has a golden opportunity now to reset itself, to invest in itself, to work on itself, and depend less on others. Like I said, the world has moved from globalization to one of every nation for itself. and God for us all. I agree with that paradigm. I support it. Dependent economies are never powerful economies. Economies that are powerful have always been able to stand on their own footing. They've always been able to do two things to get the economic base stronger. And that is investment in infrastructure and investment in energy. If Africa can invest in energy and Africa can invest in infrastructure, we are well set to attract foreign investment, and we are well set to harness local direct investment in our countries. With the Trump victory, it is a sign that we have to do better this time around and prove to Donald Trump, and prove to the West, and prove to China, and prove to Russia that we are a serious continent, and we could be a very serious and competitive partner with any other power in the world. Thank you very much. And I am Cyril Django, and my producer is Titus Ikiragu. This is African Perspective.